Chapter 1 of Abbotsford and Newstead Abbey. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Greg Giordano. Abbotsford and Newstead Abbey by Washington Irving. Chapter 1 Abbotsford, Part 1. I sit down to perform my promise of giving you an account of a visit made many years since to Abbotsford. I hope, however, that you do not expect much from me, for the travelling notes taken at the time are so scanty and vague, and my memory so extremely fallacious, that I fear I shall disappoint you with the meagreness and crudeness of my details. Late in the evening of August 29th, 1817, I arrived at the ancient little border town of Selkirk, where I put up for the night. I had come down from Edinburgh, partly to visit Melrose Abbey and its vicinity, but chiefly to get sight of the mighty minstrel of the North. I had a letter of introduction to him from Thomas Campbell, the poet, and had reason to think, from the interest he had taken in some of my earlier scribblings, that a visit from me would not be deemed an intrusion. On the following morning, after an early breakfast, I set off in a post-chaise for the Abbey. On the way thither I stopped at the gate of Abbotsford, and sent the postillion to the house with the letter of introduction and my card, on which I had written that I was on my way to the ruins of Melrose Abbey, and wished to know whether it would be agreeable to Mr. Scott, he had not yet been made a baronet, to receive a visit from me in the course of the morning. While the postillion was on his errand, I had time to survey the mansion. It stood some short distance below the road, on the side of a hill sweeping down to the Tweed, and was as yet but a snug gentleman's cottage, with something rural and picturesque in its appearance. The whole front was overrun with evergreens, and immediately above the portal was a great pair of elk horns, branching out from beneath the foliage, and giving the cottage the look of a hunting lodge. The huge baronial pile, to which this modest mansion in a manner gave birth, was just emerging into existence. Part of the walls, surrounded by scaffolding, already had risen to the height of the cottage, and the courtyard in front was encumbered by masses of hewn stone. The noise of the chase had disturbed the quiet of the establishment. Out sallied the warder of the castle, a black greyhound, and, leaping on one of the blocks of stone, began a furious barking. His alarm brought out the whole garrison of dogs, both mongrel, puppy, whelp, and hound, and curs of low degree, all open-mouthed and vociferous. I should correct my quotation. Not a cur was to be seen on the premises. Scott was too true a sportsman, and had too high a veneration for pure blood, to tolerate a mongrel. In a little while the lord of the castle himself made his appearance. I knew him at once by the descriptions I had read and heard, and the likenesses that had been published of him. He was tall, and of a large and powerful frame. His dress was simple and almost rustic. An old green shooting coat, with a dog whistle at the buttonhole, brown linen pantaloons, stout shoes that tied at the ankles, and a white hat that had evidently seen service. He came limping up the gravel walk, aiding himself by a stout walking staff, but moving rapidly and with vigor. By his side jogged along a large iron-gray staghound of most grave demeanor, who took no part in the clamor of the canine rabble, but seemed to consider himself bound, for the dignity of the house, to give me a courteous reception. Before Scott had reached the gate he called out in a hearty tone, welcoming me to Abbotsford, and asking news of Campbell. Arrived at the door of the chaise, he grasped me warmly by the hand. "Come, drive down to the house," said he. "You're just in time for breakfast, and afterward you shall see all the wonders of the Abbey." I would have excused myself on the plea of having already made my breakfast. "Hot, man!" cried he, "a ride in the morning in the keen air of the Scotch hills is warrant enough for a second breakfast." I was accordingly whirled to the portal of the cottage, and in a few moments found myself seated at the breakfast table. There was no one present but the family, which consisted of Mrs. Scott, her eldest daughter Sophia, then a fine girl about 17, Miss Anne Scott, 2 or 3 years younger, Walter, a well-grown stripling, and Charles, a lively boy, 11 or 12 years of age. I soon felt myself quite at home, and my heart in a glow with the cordial welcome I experienced. I had thought to make a mere morning visit, but found I was not to be let off so lightly. "You must not think our neighborhood is to be read in a morning, like a newspaper," said Scott. "It takes several days of study for an observant traveller that has a relish for old-world trumpery. After breakfast you shall make your visit to Melrose Abbey. I shall not be able to accompany you, as I have some household affairs to attend to, but I will put you in charge of my son Charles, who is very learned in all things touching the old ruin, and the neighborhood it stands in, and he and my friend Johnny Bower will tell you the whole truth about it, with a good deal more that you are not called upon to believe, unless you be a true and nothing doubting antiquary. When you come back, I'll take you out on a ramble about the neighborhood. Tomorrow we will take a look at the Yarrow, and the next day we will drive over to Dryburgh Abbey, which is a fine old ruin well worth your seeing." In a word, before Scott had got through his plan, I found myself committed for a visit of several days, and it seemed as if a little realm of romance was suddenly opened before me. After breakfast I accordingly set off for the Abbey with my little friend Charles, whom I found a most sprightly and entertaining companion. He had an ample stock of anecdote about the neighborhood, which he had learned from his father, and many quaint remarks and sly jokes, evidently derived from the same source, all which were uttered with a Scottish accent and a mixture of Scottish phraseology that gave them additional flavor. On our way to the Abbey, he gave me some anecdotes of Johnny Bower, to whom his father had alluded. He was sexton of the parish, and custodian of the ruin, employed to keep it in order and show it to strangers. A worthy little man, not without ambition in his humble sphere. The death of his predecessor had been mentioned in the newspapers, so that his name had appeared in print throughout the land. When Johnny succeeded to the guardianship of the ruin, he stipulated that, on his death, his name should receive like honorable blazon, with this addition, that it should be from the pen of Scott. The latter gravely pledged himself to pay this tribute to his memory, and Johnny now lived in the proud anticipation of a poetic immortality. I found Johnny Bower a decent-looking little old man, in blue coat and red waistcoat. He received us with much greeting, and seemed delighted to see my young companion, who was full of merriment and waggery, drawing out his peculiarities for my amusement. The old man was of one of the most authentic and particular of cicerones. He pointed out everything in the Abbey that had been described by Scott in his Lay of the Last Minstrel, and would repeat, with broad Scottish accent, the passage which celebrated it. Thus, in passing through the cloisters, he made me remark the beautiful carvings of leaves and flowers wrought in stone with the most exquisite delicacy, and notwithstanding the lapse of centuries, retaining their sharpness as if fresh from the chisel, rivalling, as Scott has said, the real objects of which they were imitations. Nor herb nor floweret glistened there, but was carved in the cloister arches as fair. He pointed out also, among the carved work, a nun's head of much beauty, which he said Scott always stopped to admire, for the shearer had a wonderful eye for all sic matters. I would observe that Scott seemed to derive more consequence in the neighborhood from being sheriff of the county than from being poet. In the interior of the Abbey, Johnny Bower conducted me to the identical stone on which stout William of Deloraine and the monk took their seat on that memorable night when the wizard's book was to be rescued from the grave. Nay, Johnny had even gone beyond Scott in the minuteness of his antiquarian research, for he had discovered the very tomb of the wizard. the position of which had been left in doubt by the poet. This he boasted to have ascertained by the position of the oriel window, and the direction in which the moonbeams fell at night, through the stained glass, casting the shadows to the red cross on the spot, as had all been specified in the poem. "I pointed out the whole to the shirra," said he, "and he couldna gainsay but it was vera clear." I found afterward that Scott used to amuse himself with the simplicity of the old man, and his zeal in verifying every passage of the poem, as though it had authentic history, and that he always acquiesced in his deductions. I subjoin the description of the wizard's grave, which called forth the antiquarian research of Johnny Bower. "Lo, warrior, now the cross of red Points to the grave of the mighty dead. Slow moved the monk to the broad flag stone, Which the bloody cross was traced upon. He pointed to a sacred nook, An iron bar the warrior took, And the monk made a sign with his withered hand, The grave's huge portal to expand. It was by dint of passing strength That he moved the massy stone at length. I would you had been there to see How the light broke forth so gloriously, Streamed upward to the chancel roof, And through the galleries far aloof, And, issuing from the tomb, Showed the monk's cowl and visage pale, Danced on the dark brown warrior's mail, And kissed his waving plume. Before their eyes the wizard lay, As if he had not been dead a day. His hoary beard in silver rolled, He seemed some 70 winters old. A palmer's amice wrapped him round, With a wrought Spanish baldry bound, Like a pilgrim from beyond the sea. His left hand held his book of might, A silver cross was in his right, The lamp was placed beside his knee. The fictions of Scott had become facts with honest Johnny Bower. From constantly living among the ruins of Melrose Abbey, and pointing out the scenes of the poem, the Lay of the Last Minstrel had, in a manner, become interwoven with his whole existence, and I doubt whether he did not now and then mix up his own identity with the personages of some of its cantos. He could not bear that any other production of the poet should be preferred to the Lay of the Last Minstrel. "Faith," said he to me, "is just even as good a thing as Mr. Scott has written, and if he were standing there I'd tell him so, and then he'd laugh." He was loud in his praises of the affability of Scott. "He'll come here sometimes," said he, "with great folks in his company, and the first I know of it is his voice calling out 'Johnny, Johnny Bower,' and when I go out, I am sure to be greeted with a joke or a pleasant word. He'll stand and crack and laugh with me just like an old wife, and to think that of a man who has such an awful knowledge o' history." One of the ingenious devices on which the worthy little man prided himself was to place a visitor opposite to the Abbey, with his back to it, and bid him bend down and look at it between his legs. This, he said, gave an entire different aspect to the ruin. Folks admired the plan amazingly, but as to the ladies, they were dainty on the matter, and contented themselves with looking from under their arms. As Johnny Bower piqued himself upon showing everything laid down in the poem, there was one passage that perplexed him sadly. It was the opening of one of the cantos. "If thou wouldst view fair Melrose aright, Go visit it by the pale moonlight, For the gay beams of light some day Gild but to flout the ruins gray," etc. In consequence of this admonition, many of the most devout pilgrims to the ruin could not be contented with a daylight inspection, and insisted it could be nothing unless seen by the light of the moon. Now, unfortunately, the moon shines but for part of the month, and, what is still more unfortunate, is very apt in Scotland to be obscured by clouds and mists. Johnny was sorely puzzled, therefore, how to accommodate his poetry-struck visitors with this indispensable moonshine. At length, in a lucky moment, he devised a substitute. This was a great double tallow candle stuck upon the end of a pole, with which he could conduct his visitors about the ruins on dark nights, so much to their satisfaction that, at length, he began to think it even preferable to the moon itself. "It does not light up the Abbey at since, to be sure," he would say, "but then ye can shift it about, and show the old ruin bit by bit, whiles the moon only shines on one side." Honest Johnny Bower! So many years have elapsed since the time I treat of, that it is more than probable his simple head lies beneath the walls of his favourite abbey. It is to be hoped his humble ambition has been gratified, and his name recorded by the pen of the man he so loved and honoured. End of Chapter 1. Recording by Greg Giordano. Newport Richey, Florida.